It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Joining us this week, Luke Baker, Paris Bureau Chief of the Reuters News Agency.
Good to see you.
How are you?
Very well, thanks.
Welcome as well to Venezuelan reporter and photojournalist Sarai Suarez.
Hello, François.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
Thank you.
France24.com senior editor David Gomez-Zano made the long trip from the second floor. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
All right. And Judah Grunstein, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review. Where does one find World Politics Review?
Online at worldpoliticsreview.com.
Okay, The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. The emerging giant that a decade ago was putting the B in BRICS goes to the polls this Sunday. Long gone in Brazil are the days of Lula, the heavy favorite, a far-right 7-term congressman who's a former army captain. Jair Bolsonaro seen here getting an honorary black belt and a knife from a Rio Jiu-Jitsu academy for having overcome an assassination attempt on the campaign trail.
If it's God's will, next Sunday I will win the election. I hope that as President and Commander-in-Chief, I will be able to start fighting out corruption, violence, and ideologies as of next year.
David Gomez-Zano, President Bolsonaro.
Well, it seems like the most likely outcome of the Brazilian election, and definitely a storm for Brazil, because tone of the campaign, what Bolsonaro has said over the years, over the last weeks, makes it quite worrying. President Bolsonaro who will be could be, if he wins the second round, he will be sworn into office on the 1st of January, and then we'll see what's if his rhetoric is serious, if he's going to put his opponents aside, if he's going to crack down on the political groups that he sees as enemies. That's what I have in mind at the moment.
Having it in mind, having been a correspondent in Brazil, did you imagine we'd come to this?
Well, from my years in Brazil, there's many things I thought were impossible that happened. One is the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff. Like many Brazilians, I thought it was completely impossible during the mass demonstrations during the year 2015 that were asking for her removal from power. I thought this is just preventing her to govern the country, but in no way can it go as far as an impeachment, and it did.
According to the latest polls, Bolsonaro's rival, the Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad, has narrowed the gap to 10 points, but with a sizable portion still undecided. But it looks, Sarai Suarez, like too little, too late. What do you make of this election?
I think it's a very dangerous scenario for Latin America because we're talking about Brazil. It's not just a little country. It's one of the biggest in the region. It has a lot of power in Latin America. And also the consequences for other countries like Venezuela are going to be important if he becomes president the next Sunday. The differences between the population that are voting for one candidate and the other one show that it is obvious that the divisions in that country are pushing this very radical man to get the power, and the consequences are going to be terrible.
How radical is he? Because on the one hand, he makes these very hard statements about guns, extrajudiciary killings. He seems to be in favor of them. Remarks against women, against homosexuals, against Afro-Brazilians. On the other hand, he's a 7-term congressman.
Yes, but it's always like the extreme right has always this big mouth and they say a lot of things. But I will be careful to say that he will not accomplish what he's saying. I'm not saying he's going to do everything because obviously there are some mechanisms that are going to stop the madness of this man. but I think he can go very far in the decisions he makes. So I think it's nothing to just put on the side. We have to be careful about what he's saying.
A good number of those voting either too young or not yet born when the military left power in 1985. 72 candidates elected this time around are either from the army or the police. That's the most since the bad old days of the dictatorship in 1964.
When the political class is rotten, people turn to us, the military, for credibility.
Judah Grunstein?
And there's something that's that I keep getting drawn back to with this story, which is that we got used to under the Lula years to this global brand of Brazil, and it was a happy brand, a brand where income was being redistributed. A lot of people were being pulled out of poverty, but in a democratic way compared to, for instance, in Venezuela. And at the same time, every country has contradictions, and Brazil's contradiction is that it has this dictatorship past. It has a very strong lobby in Congress. I think it's the BBB lobby, Bible, bullets, and beef, and it's very conservative. These are the guys who are basically clear cutting the Amazon, driving indigenous peoples off their land, very violently in many cases, and they exercise a huge amount of power. And so that's always been the other side of Brazil that the Lula years kind of overshadowed, and now we see it returning in a way because I think Bolsonaro as president will reflect a lot of that agenda since he doesn't have his own independent power base in parliament. And the other thing is, we ran a piece at WPR recently on anti-corruption efforts and some of the downsides. No one's for corruption, but when you have anti-corruption campaigns, one of the real risks is that you discredit the entire political class. And you have people saying, well, they're all corrupt. The problem in Brazil is that they actually are all corrupt. I mean, you have a huge amount of the sitting parliament that has open corruption cases that don't get decided because of their parliamentary immunity. You have Temer, who's the president who took over after Rousseff, who has an open corruption case that he's been dodging with his immunity. And so that always opens the space for demagogues like Bolsonaro to come in and say, well, they're all corrupt, now we need something new. It's similar to what happened in the US that opened the space for Donald Trump in terms of we have to drain the swamp of Washington. And we see it happening here. And again, with Lula in jail because of a corruption conviction. I'm not sure that we would have had the same scenario if Lula had been the opposing candidate to Bolsonaro compared to Haddad.
It's about draining the Brazilian swamp, Baker?
Well, I mean, I'm not the world's closest follower of Brazil, but what you can see, this clearly is going to have repercussions for Brazilians and the policies he pursues from January if he wins. But it's the bigger sort of geopolitical narrative as well that this fits into. He follows a playbook, which is the Steve Bannon playbook. I think he will, if he's elected, be encouraged by that. Or if you get knocked back a peg or two, you feel that the path that Trump has beaten is the sort of path to follow. The Chinese are already quite concerned about the direction that Brazil could go in with their investments there. It starts to shake up the way that Europe looks at Brazil and wonders about the reliability of its investments, whether that comes from Portugal, Spain, or wherever. So I think it opens up, it makes everyone start scratching their heads and wondering which way it's going to go.
Luke Baker talking about Steve Bannon, who the former Donald Trump strategist, who earlier in the day endorsed Bolsonaro, who met with Bolsonaro's son a few months back. How much influence does a Steve Bannon have?
Direct influence, I don't know, but what we've learned last week, thanks to Folha de São Paulo, the big newspaper from São Paulo, is that there's been some strange things happening with the WhatsApp campaign. And apparently it's likely that
orchestrated mass sending out of messages over that social media.
Exactly. And that rings a bell. I mean, Cambridge Analytica, that sort of affairs that over the last month rather. Yes, it is very likely that social media has played a very important role in the 46% Jair Bolsonaro
got in the first round.
And Bolsonaro has been a man from the social media. He has been very strong communicating through this having this kind of communication. He likes the show. He likes to shock people. He likes to say big things. So he's playing on all that, the Donald Trump style, but he's playing on that card to get upset everybody and trying to move people out. We have to remember that he is an evangelist. I don't know how to say it.
An evangelical.
Evangelical, and this is a massive vote in Brazil. I mean, you can maybe talk a little bit more about that, but this is a very important vote in this country, and he's moving all that people to get out there. And we have to remember all this fatigue that is also in Latin America about the left power. It has been many years with all these countries on the left side, and now they're all moving on the right side. So this is going to be very complex.
The question of Bannon's influence, I think people like Bannon, they're almost like the water table underneath what's happening on the ground in politics. And what we see now around the world, really, whether it's in the Philippines with Duterte, Trump, Bolsonaro, and Brazil, is the mode of communication in politics has become a lot more vulgar and a lot more coarse. And people are getting away with saying things that shock and that would have disqualified them even 5-10 years ago. And that, I think, is where people like Bannon come in because of his impact on the media landscape in the U.S., but also he's really more than anything, Bannon is a communications advisor. And that's where his influence, I think, is felt around the world.
But it's on the communications, it's also on the policy, right? People feel more free to kind of flip-flop on policy or change decisions and come up with some explanation where they don't really feel they have to be principled on it. Now, in the case of Bolsonaro, he's now already seeming to shift maybe on the Paris Climate Accord, which, from Macron's point of view and from maybe the world
If he
environmental
gets
point
to
of view.
keep control on the Amazon, he says.
Right. So okay. So it's almost sort of flip flopping. Sort of I can look at social media, how the communication strategy working, perhaps shift my strategy. It's a very unpinned and downable, very slippery kind of way of running an administration, and I think that makes it very hard for people to predict.
Judah Grunstein mentioning coarse political discourse. That brings us to our next topic. In the build-up to the U.S. midterm elections, many wondering if violent political discourse triggered actual political violence this week. In South Florida, the arrest this Friday of a 56-year-old man in connection with the mailing of at least 12 parcel bombs. All the targets prominent Trump critics. CNN's New York bureau evacuated Wednesday, the same day explosive devices were mailed to the Clintons, the Obamas, and more. No injuries so far. The targets read like a who's who of prominent Trump critics, and people are making that connection at this point in time, Judah Grunstein.
Well, yeah, because people have been warning for a long time in terms of Trump. Two weeks ago, he lauded a congressman who had body slammed a reporter in the closing days of a campaign, a special election, I think a year ago. And he also incites violence against protesters within his rallies. And people have been saying for a while that that's a third rail that you have to avoid. The thing is, again, and not jumping to conclusions because we don't know anything about the suspect, if it's the person who did this or the eventual culprit. One of the things that I'm struck by in terms of the U.S. is that there really isn't political violence, in the sense that a lot of the violence comes in the form of mass shootings and school shootings that are apolitical. And then when you have things like political violence, or that would have been political violence in another time, it's often people who are who seem to have quite a few signs of mental illness or instability. And so we'll see what plays out here. But the problem is that when you are loose with those kinds of allusions to violence, even if most people can make the distinction and say, "Oh, he's only joking around," there are people who are susceptible to that and who are vulnerable to that, maybe because they have a mental illness or some other vulnerability. And those are the people that you need to firewall political discourse from triggering them or inciting them. And I think that that's where Trump gets very carried away in the political theater of his rallies, which resemble...
Is it irresponsible?
Yeah, of course it's irresponsible. They resemble professional wrestling performances. And I think that in his mind, that's all he's doing is political theater. I mean, that's a generous reading of it. But of course, it's irresponsible. Everyone knows it's irresponsible, and I think on some level he does too. But again, that element of provoking people and shocking people and outraging people is like catnip to him. He can't resist it.
We saw two Donald Trumps earlier, the President of the United States commending law enforcement agencies and stating unequivocally at a function that political violence has no place in our society. But be it on the campaign trail in Wisconsin Wednesday or over Twitter the following day, he's still going after one of his favorite foes, the media. A big part of the anger we see today, capital A, is caused by the purposely false and inaccurate reporting of the mainstream media that I refer to as fake news. It has gotten so bad and hateful, it is beyond description, Luke Baker.
I mean, we're almost living in one of those snow globes where, information becomes so distorted so immediately and no one really knows, facts just become almost meaningless. One of the things that's fascinated me about this story is how rapidly what was once considered radical thinking, the false flag, that this was something that may have been done by the left in order to stir up, to make it look like the right wing in the United States was targeting the Democrats, became a mainstream kind of almost discussion. It was covered immediately in the New York Times as how quickly that sort of meta discussion about what may be behind these pipe bombs was all about.
And on the other end of the spectrum, the top trending hashtag on Twitter just hours afterwards was MAGA bomber. Yeah. We didn't know who it was, but there was people jumping to conclusions.
Right, and so but what's crazy is we're now 10 or 11 days away from the midterms, and an event like this can end up having, even if it looks serious, although no bombs exploded, people's interpretation of who may have been behind it or who may have why it was done could end up having an impact on how people end up voting or mobilizing one side or the other. And so these events end up having really quite potentially meaningful repercussions in an environment of kind of absence of information, absence of kind of reason, really, a really frenetic atmosphere.
We're going to pick up on this, but we have to take a very quick break. Hold your fire. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week, The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast, and we're joined by Luke Baker, Paris bureau chief of the Reuters news agency. Venezuelan reporter and photojournalist Sara Suarez is with us. France24.com senior editor David Gormezano, and Judah Grunstein, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review. Now, we were discussing the toxic atmosphere in the United States, 11 days ahead of the U.S. Midterm elections. Up until this mail bomb spate, there was the two words, they were Kavanaugh and caravan, bandied about by Donald Trump. Trump sending 800 troops to the Mexican border, even though this migrant caravan of several thousand, mostly Hondurans, is still nearly 1,000 kilometers away in southern Mexico right now. Earlier in the week, the U.S. president repeating his unsubstantiated claim that there are Middle Easterners in that caravan.
You had said that there were Middle Easterners in the caravan. Can you explain that? Are you saying there are terrorists?
Well, there could very well be, yeah. There could very well be. And if you look at...
you know for sure?
I have very good information.
David Gormezano, your thoughts? I mean, what would happen if a French politician said something like this?
That's a good question. It seems it's Donald Trump. He can say one thing in the morning, the opposite in the evening, and all of this sets the media agenda. And it's.
Does it shock you, or does it leave you unfazed when he says stuff like this? Because this is unsubstantiated.
It makes me quite angry, really. But I don't know if I'm getting, or if we're getting tired of.
You know who's probably angrier
angry.
than you is Sara Suarez at the remarks of his vice president, because Mike Pence saying it's Venezuela that's financing the caravan.
Yeah, so that was something that was said, but again, we were talking about the way the irresponsibility that the politicians are just arguing and saying things without any respect and any information. We said always that Americans never said something without having proof. That's something that we used to think. But today it seems that it's not true anymore. They can say whatever they want and put the responsibility on anybody. I don't believe Venezuela is mixed to that situation with Honduras. But this kind of affirmations from a high government member are completely disappointing and get angry everybody because it's just irresponsible. I believe it's amazing.
There's a chart that I think a Canadian journalist produces where he measures all the falsehoods or that Trump has uttered, and he produces it as a bar chart. And in the last 3 weeks, it's just it's risen exponentially. I don't really know. No one's offering an explanation for why, but it is amazing that this discourse becomes so unhinged.
Because there's midterm elections coming.
Yeah, but it's okay. Yeah, but it is amazing that people don't seem to expect anything other than some phrases like, oh well, it's a variation of the truth, or there is no truth, or we're not not needing to offer any evidence. It's amazing.
But Trump is a huckster, right? He's a carnival barker. And he knows that people remember the first thing they hear, and they often don't remember the debunking of the lie.
Yeah. Well, he's also president of the United States, one who's threatened to cut aid to El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala.
That too. I mean, again, those are acts of Congress in terms of aid that's dispersed to those countries. So we'll see if he can do that. In general, there's been a lot of pushback in Congress when he's made those kind of threats before, because people in Congress understand why that aid is so important and what that aid actually buys the U.S., which is it does buy the U.S. a certain amount of security in terms of trying to help stabilize those countries in terms of the violence and economic instability that they experience. But the thing about Trump is that with 10 days before the election, there's no time to debunk all the lies, especially when they're coming as fast and furious as he's saying them. I mean, Venezuela doesn't have the hard currency to be funding a caravan of migrants in Honduras and Guatemala. They have way higher priorities for the money that they do have, and they don't gain anything from that. So all these things. The one last thing though is that in the end, it's really at this point the only thing that can make this kind of rhetoric, make this kind of use of communication, lying, disinformation, fear-mongering, the only thing that can make it ineffective is the election and the election results. If the voters go to the polls in 10 days and they decide that this just didn't convince them, then we'll see a lot of people saying,
well,
it was a huge mistake.
Except there's the question
now,
of
it won't be the same kind of campaign.
Except it's not just whether or not it's a lie. It's a question also of what the other side has to say. And the Democrats are divided on how to approach the issue of immigration. In an editorial, The Economist calling Donald Trump's Central American policy wrong, and the Democrats incoherent, saying they should start by conceding that Mr. Trump, though he lies about the details, has got one big thing right. America cannot let people in simply because they arrive in a crowd.
This is always a weak point for progressive left parties, in the sense that in terms of the humanist aspect there and the humanitarian aspect, you want to be able to help everyone who's in need. In terms of the reality of things, first of all, sometimes you just can't, whether it has to do with resources or having to do with reaching them, because the people who are on the road walking to the U.S. right now are a tiny minority of the people who need help in these countries. And the idea that we can help every single person, we can't. And that goes against the principles, the humanitarian principles of a center-left and progressive left party. So that always makes this issue a difficult one. But there are voices in the Democrats that have been pushing for immigration reform. There are serious proposals in terms of what to do with the people who are already in the country who aren't regularized, how to control the border, how to attract high-skilled immigration. All those proposals are out there. And it's not true that it's the Democrats that are blocking a deal. That, again, is another piece of disinformation. But even so, those proposals will be a lot less and will fall short of what a lot of people on the left would like to see. But it's not true that those proposals aren't out there. They are.
All right, 3 weeks on, Donald Trump's been dialing up the pressure on the Saudis over the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, stating a couple of days back in an interview with the Wall Street Journal that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman bears the ultimate responsibility. MBS, as he's known, who earlier this week met alongside the king with the brother and son of the Washington Post opinions page contributor. This before lifting a travel ban on Salah Khashoggi and allowing him and his family to travel to the U.S. That same day, MBS seen alongside the Crown Prince of Bahrain and the Lebanese Prime Minister, who you'll recall he also briefly sequestered Luke Baker at the end of last year.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, you can see Hariri sitting there, and as if nothing ever happened, even jokes from MBS about, Hariri's going to be here for a couple of days. Don't anyone start reporting that he's been kidnapped. It's really it's astonishing at a number of different levels. The MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, looked like he'd really been set back, obviously, by what happened in Istanbul, and some of the fallout is still to come. But it looked like the investment initiative was really going to sort of implode.
This so-called Davos in the desert.
Davos in the desert was going to implode. A lot of CEOs pulled out, et cetera, et cetera. They all sent their deputies. France sent, the CEO of Total still went. The halls were full. There seemed to be almost programmed kind of clapping every single time MBS opened his mouth. He announced $58 billion worth of deals. He managed to sort of almost weather this sort of in a public relations kind of way, this storm. What we're waiting for now is to find out whether any very hard, clear evidence can link the organization of this killing to MBS. And I think that's where the risk still lies. I still think to my mind, it's still doubtful that we're going to end up with that. But I think that's the next.
Really, even though there's all these high ups who are very close to him?
I mean, you can interpret in lots of different ways, but the feeling I get is that he's battened down the hatches. He's already instilled so much of his power in Saudi Arabia that he may be able to weather this, even if it would have to be very clear, hard evidence.
David Gormazano, you agree?
Yeah, I think that the damage.
He will weather it.
I think the damage is done. I think for many people, the link between MBS and the killing is done. Maybe it will never be proven. It will never. But
you won't be able to undo that image.
No, I don't think so. I think if Ben Salman does a tour in Europe in a year or two, you'll find protesters in the street saying, "Killer, you're a killer."
There are two things. I'm sorry. There are two things. One is that the damage is done. He's associated with the killing. And also 10 days from now, there's going to be the results of the midterm elections. There's going to be new news. There's going to be the pipe bomb stuff that already is taking the headlines away. One of the things
we said that 2 weeks ago, and it's been 3 weeks.
But one of the things that the Khashoggi killing had was that it was a journalist in a very powerful paper in Washington, and that MBS has a lot of enemies. But the more time that goes by between what happened and any actual repercussions for him personally, however,
Turkey's president seems to say, "I've got more cards and
he might."
that I can play here.
The real danger for MBS is in the medium term, because at the investment conference, for instance, there were those deals, but most of it was in the oil and energy sector. And one of the things that MBS is trying to do is diversify the Saudi economy and say to investors, look, it's safe to invest in the kingdom. He wasn't too convincing on that. And that's what a lot of his political capital in the kingdom is based on, is being able to actually deliver on his economic reforms. If he can't do that, he's generated a lot of enemies in the kingdom at this point. And it might, especially if his friend Erdogan has more tidbits to reveal, it might not end well for him. But
all right, David Gormazano talking about the pressure from the West. Germany last weekend suspending arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Canada, though, despite that diplomatic row over the summer that saw its ambassador kicked out of Saudi Arabia, it looks set to stay in its contract to deliver light armored vehicles to the Saudis. Same story here in Paris.
It is pure demagoguery to say stop selling weapons. It has nothing to do with the Khashoggi case. What has to do more with arms sales is the situation in Yemen. That is where the situation has to be very closely monitored.
Don't associate it to the Khashoggi case?
I mean, clearly, obviously, selling arms to Saudi Arabia is not directly linked to the Khashoggi case. But, I mean, even Macron can understand that there's two wars being... Saudi is prosecuting a war against Yemen, and it's also running an embargo against Qatar. Both decisions taken by Mohammed bin Salman. If Mohammed bin Salman is connected directly or, at this point associated very clearly with the killing of Khashoggi, it suggests that it's someone who's pretty not in complete control of his faculties, let's say, or is taking very rash decisions. And therefore, arms sales to a state like that, are they really contributing to stability and peace? I mean, I think there is a connection. I think you can make a connection.
What I see is that there is a lot of money on the table, and this is going to calm down. Anesthesia will make its effect. And a few weeks from now, we will not be talking about this anymore. And this is very sad because this is a barbarian act that was committed to this journalist. And it's just showing how powerful this man and this country is, and that they can do anything they want. I mean, come on. France is saying just, hey, let's wait. Let's not just put out all the contracts. Let's take our time to decide. This is outrageous that the reaction should be in a block and they should decide together, like do something about this situation. And they're just taking time. No, let's think about it. It shows how powerful is this.
David Gormazano, full disclosure here. Does French public opinion care about this or about the war in Yemen?
About this, maybe. This is the kind of news that you tend to remember. A journalist killed by a squad of Secret Service people in a consulate in Turkey. I think that might stay in the mind of people. The war in Yemen, it's been going on for quite some years, and with France 24, we're following, we're trying to, but I'm not sure it is striking a chord among the general public. But this story is so incredible and so atrocious that, I don't know, let's talk about it again when Mohammed bin Salman does a state visit in Paris. Let's see what's happened. All
right, we're going to graduate to some perhaps lighter drama. But there's plenty of it and plenty of theatrics between Brussels and Rome this week. Italy becoming the first ever Eurozone nation to have its draft budget rejected by the Commission.
We will respond politely to all their letters. I am personally ready to meet the President of the European Commission tomorrow to explain to him how Italy will develop with this move. But no one will tolerate a single euro being removed from the budget.
Not a single euro. And the soundbite we played you is of the Deputy Prime Minister, and it was that same Deputy Prime Minister, the far-right leader, who was on the front page of Le Monde the other night. Is he, in fact, the leader in all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear. Salvini is basically is the leader behind the scenes. Di Maio has been stood alongside him and has been very clear, taking the same line. Conte doesn't really seem to count. But what I find interesting at a number of levels are their communication. So Salvini says, "Yeah, I want to reach a deal with the Brussels as well, but on our terms." So okay, we can have a deal. And then when Draghi comes out and says, Draghi, the ECB president, comes out and says, "Look, I think we can reach a deal." Salvini comes back today and says, "I'll reach a deal, but I'm not moving a millimeter from the position we already have." So he's going to push a hard line. I think he's going to push it all the way.
It's a fight he was fixing for.
Yeah, and I think he'll push it all the way.
Well, I mean, he might want to give a call to Alexis Tsipras before he pushes his line too far.
Greek Prime Minister.
And again, this is the fundamental weakness in the design of the euro and in the European Union in terms of you have common monetary policy, but not common fiscal policy. And so you have states that can engage in basically pyromania. That's the danger with Italy, is that the danger of Greece was not so much Greece, but what the contagion from Greece to countries like Italy. Italy is a huge economy, and it's hugely indebted. And the behind this disagreement is how much more debt can they take on in their budget this year. The problem is that the euro, really, there's been some corrections around the edges. There's been some structural, maybe window dressing put on it. But I don't think the euro could withstand another run on a country like Italy with just quantitative easing from the central bank and throwing cash on it, especially given some of the developments going on in terms of trade and in terms of the relations with the U.S. and China right now.
All right, the markets for now in a holding pattern up to a point, though. The spread the famous spread in yields between 10-year Italian and German government bonds has grown. And it looks like, because now they have 3 weeks, David Gormazano, to respond. So we'll see what happens then. But Judah Grunstein saying that the markets could bring Italy to reason. Judah talking about pyromania. Now, not everyone sees it that way. We heard the leader of the French far left, for instance, give his support to this coalition government in Italy, saying you're standing up against austerity. This is a good thing.
Well, it seems like we're back to the Greek crisis that went for a few years. And it's about sovereignty, national sovereignty versus the European Commission and very much so Germany. I think in the next 3 weeks, there's the German government is going to make its points, saying to Salvini, well, we don't care. You are going to cut back on your budget. And if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. But
it's not just the German government, by the way. Salvini's got lots of friends when he talks about migration among far right and far right governments across Europe, but not on this issue.
But on this issue, it's Germany running the show in terms of economics
and markets. And on the substance of it, there is a strong argument to be made that they do need some sort of stimulus spending and they do need to prime the pump in terms of the budget. I'm not saying that he's necessarily wrong on the substance of it, but if the markets send the spread too high, then there's not much that Italy can do.
Well, that's the thing. I think, the reason why I think he'll push it for now is that he can't back down. That would be a massive loss of face. I don't think the situation has got, those spreads are pretty high, but they're nothing like what we saw in Greece back in 2010, 2011, 2012, or in Ireland or Portugal for that matter. There's some way for it to go. It is a very risky situation, and there will be massive market pressure. And as that market pressure grows, the pressure grows on countries. For example, France has 14% exposure to French banks. Have 14% of Italian debt is owned by French banks. So once that situation starts to get really stressful, there's a lot of pressure from other members of the Eurozone to say we need to sort something out here. But I don't think we're going to get to a solution right away. I think this will go beyond a breaking point, and then they'll have to, whether it's a rescue package or whether it's backing down, more likely from Italy and saying, okay, we'll make some adjustments to it.
Business as usual for the EU, in other words.
Right.
The most puzzling reaction from the lips of the President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani, himself Italian, and he hails from the mainstream center-right. His remarks, though, veering sharply towards a more hardline approach, though.
I will always stand by our country, and this budget must therefore be changed because it will not help to create jobs. It will unfortunately increase unemployment, and money will end up in the pockets of Roma people and foreigners, both from within and outside the EU, without providing benefits for our own citizens.
Money will wind up in the pockets of Roma people, is what he's saying there?
I think, as you were saying, I believe they're going to finish by submitting themselves to Brussels because there will be too many pressure on the.
But this is the president of the European Parliament. He's not far right. This is a man who hails from the mainstream.
But he needs to keep the relation with his country. I think he's just I don't know. It's kind of a weird affirmation, but.
Yeah, he was doing all right to begin with, and then suddenly he starts mentioning the Roma. I mean, I think the point is that, the budget, what's interesting to me, I was a correspondent in Italy for many years, you get people like Di Maio and Salvini who come in and they talk about doing things differently. And in fact, what they're trying to do is do what many Italian governments since the Second World War have done, which is to increase spending and run up the debt. And we're at 130% already, and it doesn't have very much further to go. They're not changing the narrative. They're trying to go on doing the same things that were done before. So, Tajani makes a basic point, which is the fact that maybe this budget could be done differently because it's not going to meet the expectations of the European Commission. It probably may not be that helpful to the economy. But when he brings in the Roma, I just don't know where he's going. That starts to talk about some domestic political issues, which are a totally different agenda for him.
Finally, when it comes to crime, there's what you see in TV series, and then there's reality. Dateline, the Belgian town of Montigny-sur-Sambre, that's near Charleroi, 6 thieves decide to hold up a vape store, they sell those e-cigarettes, only to be outwitted by Didier, the shopkeeper.
I told them, guys, 3 p.m. isn't the right time to rob a shop owner. All I've got now is small change. You'll be better off if you come back to rob me at the end of the day. The police said to me, sir, they'll never come back. And I answered, I think they will. I really do. They asked me why I seemed so sure. I told them, I might be a good salesman, but these guys don't seem to be the sharpest tools in the shed.
Came back, they did. First at 5:30, he scolded them, saying it wasn't time yet. And when they returned a third time at 6:30 p.m., well, the police had caught them red-handed. Sarai Suarez, your thoughts?
Well, I guess it must be a boring village, that place, because if you have time to do these kind of things.
They seem pretty well behaved for thieves too. I mean, they're punctual. They come back when they say they will.
It's amazing. It's an incredible story.
David
At
Gorman.
the time of fake news, all sounds so fresh and simple and funny.
Well,
Well, it's there's always good stories out of Belgium, right? And this is one of the most Belgian stories you can get out of Belgium. They're not accidentally blowing up their F-16s. There's this guy who, is willing to basically call the bluff on some petty crooks. Good on him.
He did call the bluff, and it reminds me of the days when I covered courts. In real life, in more courtroom dramas don't really play out the way you think they will. And there's a lot of stupidity involved in crime.
There is. I mean, first of all, a vape store, I don't know how much money it's going to have in safe, but it's sort of like you think they could choose some other targets.
Seems like a pretty muscular arrest too. I mean, like I said, they seem very well behaved. They're shaking the guy's hand.
Yeah,
They don't look violent or aggressive in any way. I mean, obviously they deserve to get arrested, but still, I don't know. I might have considered offering them a job or seeing if I could get them to change their ways.
All right, Judah Grunstein arguing for clemency. That's a good way to finish the show. Many thanks for that. I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Sarai Suarez, Luke Baker, David Gormizano. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.